The Mango Sapling. Miss Blanche, you cannot plant a mango tree here. The nasal tone ran up my spine like squeaky chalk on a blackboard, flooding me with instant irritation. I looked up from my labor, on my knees, about to do the transplant, and glared at Bertilia. She gave that sickly half smile I hated, revealing her wide gaped front teeth. I tried to formulate a reasonable response, something her half wit brain could understand. Well, that wasn't fair. It wasn't her fault that she was slow. However, she wasn't so slow that she couldn't tell I was upset, and she stood twisting her apron between her hands and scuffing the ground with her bare feet. Bertilia, I said as gently as I could, I brought this mango sapling with me all the way from town, okay? I'd like to plant my mango tree in my own yard, please. I bent over and gently began to lower the sapling's roots into the hole I'd dug. Bertilia made a snort of distress. No, Miss Blanche! Exasperated, I was about to yell when I saw the real terror in her expression. Child, what is wrong with you? I asked. If you want mangoes, we have trees already. Just ask the ladies. I stood up, my knees creaking, and looked down on the slopes of houses below me. She was right. I could spot the top of a mango tree here or there. Not many, though. Certainly not as many as you would expect in a village with such rich soil. I don't want to ask people for their mangoes, okay? I want my own. Go back into the house, I said firmly. Bertilia did a dance of agitation from one bare foot to the other, wringing her apron as I finished my planting. I mean, really, I hadn't even wanted to move this far into the country in the first place, and it seemed at every turn people were correcting my manners, my habits, or judging me with their critical stares. Bertilia turned in a full circle with her skirts raised, and I saw the firm legs and curves of a 16-year-old girl. She was very busty and light-skinned, too. Just the way he likes his women, I mused. But this was a child, with a child's mind. Surely even he would not stoop so low. I wished I could be sure about my husband's fidelity, but a flicker of movement to the far right of my property caught my attention, and I had yet another moment of exasperation. The young Rastafarian was back. He ignored us as he squatted down and pulled some tubers out of the ground. I thought of running into the house to get Tony to deal with this, but I hung back. This youth looked about 25 years old, lithe, muscular, and carried a cutlass. Bertilia gave a screech of joy and ran through the grass to meet him, and I stood bemused as he turned around and flashed her a bright, confident smile. He was very good-looking when he smiled. It had not been easy to tell him we now owned the property and he couldn't squat there anymore. Obviously, he was ignoring me. Bertilia said something to him, and they both began walking towards me. I was somewhat reassured that he was holding her hand. I knew they were brother and sister, but for some reason he had left the family home and gone in the bush, as his mother described it. See? She do that! Bertilia's wandering eye flickered towards me and a spot next to me as she tried to focus. She pointed an accusing finger at the mango sapling, which was making a valiant effort to stay upright. Enough of this nonsense. Young man, I've told you, we own this property now. You can't come and go as you please. My voice was shrill, and Bertilia took a step back while her brother remained unmoved. I grow my food here for years, he said. His voice was soft, lilting. I take what I need, and I go. I'm not troubling you. These people had no concept of property ownership. Was I going to have to get the police involved? Bertilia did that manic two-step dance of hers and said, I go tell Mammy, and literally ran down the hill past me to the paved road. She tore up the street with wild abandonment and out of sight. You don't need that, he said, jerking his chin to my poor sapling. What is it with you people? I demanded. Heedless of his cutlass, I walked up to him, looked up into his dark eyes, and pointed my finger an inch from his nose. Now you hear me. I can plant whatever I damn well want in my own yard, and you find someplace else to grow your damn yam, I said fiercely. Then I stomped, as best as I could in rain boots, to the back of my kitchen, went in and slammed the door shut. My heart was thudding in my ears, and I took some deep, calming breaths. I was actually proud of myself. Here was I, a little accountant from the city, taking on machete-wielding dreadlocks. I smiled at my own silliness, and then on impulse, I went to the kitchen window and peeked out. My mouth gaped. He was digging up my mango plant. I couldn't believe it. But what was really going on here? I wrenched open the back door and was about to yell at him when I saw Bertilia and her mother, Ma Thomas, hurrying up the street towards my yard. She really went and told on me. Was I back in preschool? Tony came into the kitchen, and I felt him looking over my shoulder at the unfolding drama. "What did you do this time, Blanche?" He sounded amused. "My major crime is trying to plant a mango tree," I snapped. He turned to go. "Wait, Tony. You need to talk to the young Rasta. I forgot his name. Matt Thomas's son," I said frantically. Tony looked over his bifocals at the young man, who gently laid my sapling to the side of the now gaping hole. The Rasta turned, saw his mother and sister laboring up the hill towards him, and began walking away from them back into the trees behind our house. He stopped as he passed us at the kitchen door. "You don't want that kind of tree," he said in his soft voice. He glanced at Tony and nodded before he continued walking. Tony nodded back, probably as bemused as I was. There was something hypnotic about this boy, as if he had captured the piece of the universe and wore it around him like an aura. Ma Thomas arrived, sweating from all her rolls and the effort of climbing our little slope. She looked at the disappearing back of the young man, and I saw the deep grief in her eyes. I wondered what had made him leave his house, but not the village. What had made him leave her? She wiped perspiration from her neck with a tissue that left white pieces of residue on her jowls. "Miss Blanche, could I get some water, please?" Her tone was accusatory, and I sighed as I realized I had yet again offended village customs. "Come in, please," I said, and fetched 2 glasses of water from the tap. I glanced around the kitchen. Bertilia had been working for us since we moved into the village 3 weeks before. The floor was swept, mopped, and not a speck of grime on my cooking pots. She might have the comprehension of a 6-year-old, but that girl could clean. So I tolerated her, even if it took all my patience to do so. Bertilia held her glass with 2 hands and drank in gulps. I noticed Tony's eyes on her heaving bosom and felt sick to my stomach. "Miss Blanche, we have a custom in the village. We don't plant mango trees in general. They are special to us, so a few of the ladies have the honor to own them. They give everybody in the village mangoes when the trees bear, so nobody has to miss mangoes." Ma Thomas smiled, revealing the same wide gap-toothed smile. I wondered how her son had escaped this genetic dental jigsaw puzzle. "Mrs. Thomas, I respect all the traditions and customs, but my plant survived being uprooted and traveling all this way because I like to have my own mango tree," I said, trying to be polite. Her smile dropped away, and I saw her eyes narrow. She and Bertilia exchanged a glance, and then they both looked at Tony. I suppose in their little world, the man had the final say, but Tony had lost all rights to tell me how to run my household. He could order around his little sex toy secretaries, but not me. I stared at him, daring him to contradict me. I had agreed to this move to have time away from the temptations of the city, hoping to save our marriage. But even on the drive up, he had been snide and nasty. "You'll like this village," he said. "Apparently no man commits adultery there." He laughed. I had been driving, and I gripped the steering wheel, stunned by his insensitivity. Bertilia got up and went over to the stove. Her mother rose with a sigh. "Mrs. Thomas, could you talk to your son, please?" I said. "He can't come onto our property as he likes. He needs to move his garden." Matt Thomas had a faraway look in her eyes. She waddled over to the kitchen back door and opened it and stepped out. Junior is his father's son. He stopped listening to me when he was 13. I can't help you. She left us. Bottilia was turning on the burners. I knew I could trust her with a simple meal like soup, but she had a tendency to leave the burners on, so I had to make sure to check after she was done cooking. Junior leave us when Daddy die, she said sadly. She sniffed, and I quickly grabbed a tissue and told her to blow her nose and go wash her hands. We ate dinner together, and then Tony offered to walk her home. I watched from the back door as he offered her his hand going down the yard slope. Ludicrous. She was as sure-footed as a goat. An hour later, he returned, saying he'd gone for a walk after dropping Bottilia home. Old habits die hard. Dusk, then darkness fell. A sliver of moon shone like a bright sickle in the sky. Tony snored in bed next to me, but sleep eluded me. I took a flashlight, put on some sneakers, and went into the backyard. Maybe I was a coward, but I wanted to plant my mango tree without prying eyes. I did so and gave it a little water. Probably shouldn't have worn my nightgown, I thought, as I shone the flashlight on the muddy patches on the thin material. Out of the darkness, something grabbed the light out of my hand, and then two very strong hands grabbed me. The breath was knocked out of me, and instead of screaming as one reasonably should, I gave a sound between a shriek and a squeal. "Settle, Sistren, settle," a familiar voice said, and I stopped struggling as I caught my breath. He let me go, and I gave him a big push in his chest. My hands encountered naked skin, and the aroma of something herbal suffused the air around us. He turned on the flashlight and swept it over me. I hugged myself as I became aware of how transparent my nightie was. He was very strong, I thought. I wondered if I should make a dash for the door, but I doubted I could outrun him. "Sistren, you don't need that kind of tree, do you?" I could see his frown by the flashlight. To my utter shock, he bent down and uprooted the sapling again. "What is wrong with you?" I asked loudly. He shushed me and tried to put his arm around my shoulder. I shrugged it off, but I could not believe how good he smelled. Shouldn't he be rank from living in the forest? "Sistren, let me talk to you a little while before the big man get up and come looking for you." He sounded so sincere, I stayed to hear him out. Long as I know myself, his voice softened, and I stepped closer to hear him. I was acutely aware of his bare chest and the long locks that hung down his shoulders. "We only have a few homes with mango trees. No men in those homes, just trees. When a man act up, if he beat his wife, if he cheat, then the wife plant a mango tree. That tells the other women in the village it is time for that man to go. So one day, the man just gone, disappear. Just like my father." His voice thickened with pain, and I instinctively touched his shoulder. "The night my father gone missing, I see my mother and other ladies digging a hole same place she plant the mango plant. The hole was much too big for that little plant, so I know then what fertilizer they're using to make the trees grow. When the tree bear, they share the fruit with everybody and the women laugh." His tone was so deeply wounded that I took his hand and squeezed it, even as the horror of what he said began to fill me. "This can't be the truth. I mean, there are lots of men here. If this were true, they'd stop it, get the police involved." I was incredulous. He shrugged and his fingers tightened slightly around mine. "It's the village way. Been like this for long before my mother was born, my grandmother time. The men here don't cheat," he said, eerily echoing Tony's tasteless joke. "But you left home. Why not the village?" I asked him gently. "It's my village, but I will never forgive her," he answered. I thought of this poor, frightened, grieving boy running away from home and surviving in the bush on his own. It was unbelievable. I let go of his hand. "Thank you for telling me. I can't stay here. My husband and I have to get out of here. I'm so sorry." And then I turned and ran, stumbling back into the house. I closed the kitchen door and sank on the floor, my mind racing and my heart pounding. What if they found out about Tony? Thank goodness Junior had pulled up the sapling and saved me from my own folly. Now I understood why Matt Thomas and Bottilia had looked at Tony so intently. They probably thought my insistence in planting the sapling meant I knew what I'd been asking for. I hit my forehead with my palm and sobbed. Crazy. Murdering. There were no words. I got up eventually, feeling drained and old. I took a shower and dumped the ruined nightie in the garbage. I sat up in the bed and listened to Tony snore and waited for the dawn. The next day was a flurry of activity for me. I decided not to tell Tony about my midnight talk with Junior. Instead, I told him I had an urgent work conference in the city and he would have to take me. I figured once we were well out of the village, I could explain everything. Tony certainly wouldn't believe me otherwise, and for all I knew, I had already put his life in danger with my stubbornness. I went into the village, bought some groceries, and thanked God our old house hadn't sold yet. I drove back to the house around 9 a.m. and went in to pack a suitcase of clothes. We could send movers for the rest later, I reasoned. There was the sound of voices from the kitchen, and some instinct made me tiptoe to peek in. Bertilia was at the stove, stirring something in a pot and giggling. Tony was rubbing her shoulders and back in long strokes. His chiropractor hands were making good use of her young, firm flesh. I left the house, my vision blurred and sobs racking me. I couldn't believe he would do this to me again. I was such a stupid fool. I rounded the house and came upon the ever-widening hole, and the now half-dead mango sapling drying in the morning sun. I grabbed it up and rammed it into the hole, covering it in a frenzy of flying soil with my hands. Let them kill him. I ran up into the woods behind the house, my nose running and my mind in chaos. I walked down a dirt track until I came upon a small hut made from tree trunks in an A-frame style. Junior was feeding the fire under a pot, but he stood up instantly when he saw me and rushed over and embraced me. This time, I didn't push him away. I wiped my face in my sleeve and cried down his naked chest. He let me, and then led me into his hut, where he wiped my face with an old t-shirt. He kissed me then, and I let him. A few hours later, he walked me back to the house. We stared at each other, still flushed and sweating. He kissed me slowly one last time, then turned and disappeared down the dirt track. I walked through the backyard and thought of what I should do next. My eyes fell on the sapling, which, amazingly, was standing strong and erect and now visible from the main road. My blood chilled. What had I been thinking? I had to uproot this cursed thing. But first, I needed to check on Tony. I was going to leave his cheating behind, but I certainly didn't want him murdered. I dashed through the back door into the kitchen where Tony was calmly eating lunch. He looked over his glasses at me, and I felt he could see the guilt on my face, smell the herbs on my body. "You're okay," I said, relieved. He frowned. "Where have you been? I thought we had to drive out to that conference before noon today." I felt anger begin to replace relief. "Where's Bertilia?" I demanded. Her back was hurting her, so I let her go home. Her spine is curved, you know. I was trying to show her how to massage it, but she's too ticklish, silly child. He shook his head and took another sip of soup. "I thought you and her..." My voice broke. His eyebrows shot up. "Blanche, she has the mental capacity of a child. Do you really think me so low?" He put the spoon down and stared at me aghast. I turned to go. "I have to pull up that mango plant," I said, my voice hollow. Tony humphed. "Matt Thomas will be very upset if you do. I guess she changed her mind. She just brought it over and had me plant it." I turned slowly. "She had you plant it?" He picked up his spoon, obviously still annoyed. "Yes, she said it was a gift for me and I would be needing it," he said. I stared at him as he went back to his soup. And then there was the knocking of many fists on both the front and the back doors.